بسم الله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu, and welcome to today's session. Today's session is actually quite an interesting one. We will be looking at today the letter Ra. Now, the letter Ra is very different to it's what we would think as the equivalent in other languages, especially like in English we have the R. What you'll notice is when we are pronouncing the letter R, for example, in English, it's very different to the Arabic letter Ra. The English one, for example, you use the very tip of the tongue, the very edges at the front, and you curl the tongue. Okay, so when it touches the upper palate, it's well away from the teeth. It's quite behind. You kind of curve the tongue, and it hits. Okay, that's where the tip of the tongue is going for the English R. For the Arabic Ra, again, it is a letter that uses a tarful lisan. So it uses the tip of the tongue and it uses a little bit of the top side as well. Okay, so it's using the tip and what we call the top of the tip. Okay, so it's this part that we use for the letter Ra. And all we're doing is we simply lift the front of the tongue. We don't slide it backwards or forwards. It literally goes straight up, and wherever it hits the opposite place on the upper palate, which is just behind the upper two front incisors, you simply lift the tongue up, and then it comes straight down again. Lift it up and then straight down again. Okay, the letter Ra is produced like this, so there's no curving of the tongue. It's just lifting the tip, touching the gums behind the upper two front teeth, and then coming straight back down again. Okay, if you want to identify this makhraj, one easy way, for those of you that do know how to trill your tongue, if you can trill your tongue and you say, for example, this sound, that's known as the trilling sound. If you can do that, then that is the makhraj of the Ra. That is where your tongue is going Ra. Okay, for those of you, I know there are some people that can't trill the tongue, but it is something that can be achieved with exercise. If you just keep practicing, sometimes it does take time, but you do get there eventually. Okay, so if you know how to trill your tongue, then that you can identify the makhraj of the Ra, the tip of the tongue straight up, and you're not curling the tip of the tongue. It's just straight up. The tip touches what lies opposite from the roof of the mouth, behind the upper two incisors, and then comes straight down again. Okay. The thing about the trilling now is when the Ra is joint. Okay. Now, when the Ra is joint, when it is sakina, for example, we're saying the word ar, what you'll find is because we're at that place where you can trill the tongue, it's very easy to actually trill the tongue when the Ra is sakin. So it's easy to say ar, ar. But actually, this is something we want to try to avoid. So there's a level of control which is required with the letter Ra. So one would think that, okay, to get the control, to stop yourself from trilling the tongue, you have to press really hard, but you don't need to press hard. Okay, you don't press hard at the top. It's actually a gentle touch. And the reason you need that gentle touch between the tongue and the upper palate is so that the sound of your voice can pass through that gap between the tongue and the upper palate. So you don't seal it off so strongly and you don't press so hard that the sound can't travel through. It's similar to the letter Dal that we saw the other day. It said, and remember I was saying that the sound keeps passing through. It's one of those letters, the sound keeps passing through the gap between the tongue and the teeth. Similar with the Ra, but this time it's between the tongue and the upper palate. You allow the sound to pass over through that makhraj. And that's only going to happen if it's a very light touch. So if here we say, you're allowed one trill. So you either have no trills or one trill. No trills would be One trill would be That would be one trill. Okay. But anything more than that, you don't want to be doing. Okay. So just be careful and mindful of it's known in Arabic as the tikrar, the trilling. The other thing about the Ra that we need to I'm not going to go into detail because of timing, but the Ra sometimes we see it, it's one of those letters that are sometimes light, sometimes heavy. Generally, the Ra is known as a light letter, but there are times where it will become heavy depending on the circumstance. So for example, when we see the letter Ra and we see it with a fatha, then this Ra is always heavy. Okay. So this one we say Ra, Ra, Ra. Okay. To make the Ra sound, nothing changes in terms of what I've told you with what's going on with the front of the tip of the tongue. That everything I've told you stays the same. The difference now is the back of the tongue comes up and it pushes back slightly too. Okay, so instead of saying ra, you're saying ra. Notice my jaw dropping, ra. The back of the tongue is up, slightly pushed back. This raises the direction of the voice in the mouth. So instead of saying ra, you're saying ra, 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 ra. Okay. Also, when the ra has a dhamma, similar thing, it's still heavy. It's still considered heavy when it has a dhamma on it. So we don't say ru, we say ru, ra, ru, ra, ru. Okay, so heavy again. And how are we going to achieve this heaviness? Same thing. Tip of the tongue is where I've asked. You know where I'm telling you the tip of the tongue goes straight up with the gum line behind the upper two front teeth. But this time the back of the tongue comes up. So it's almost like your tongue takes a curved kind of feel. The tip of the tongue will come, especially when you say oh, but then the back of the tongue is kind of up too, and it's kind of pressing back. Okay, so you have this kind of curvature in the middle of the tongue. Okay, so ra and ru are both heavy. The kasra, when we say with a kasra, when it's maksura, when we say ri, this ra with a kasra is always light. So this actually, how do we make this light? Again, the front of the tongue stays the same. This just exactly what I've done for ra, ru. I then say the. The tip of the tongue still touches the same place. The difference is, how do I make it light this time? The back of the tongue is relaxed. It's down. It's not pushing back. The whole of the tongue is just rested and flat. Okay. So this time we don't say ri, we say ri, ra, ru, heavy. Ri is light. Ra, ru, the. Ra, ru, and relax the tongue for the. Okay. So this is the makhraj of the ra. There are different scenarios and different cases when the ra can again be heavy and light, but today is not the day to go into detail with that, inshallah. So this is a brief introduction into the ra. So for example, we may see the word rabbik. Now here you have the ra with the fatha. So we know that because of the fatha, we know this ra is going to sound heavy. So this is the one where we do lift the back of the tongue and we do push a bit back. The tip of the tongue goes to the makhraj, which is raised behind the upper two front teeth or the upper two incisors. Ra, rabbik, rabbik. Okay, so this is the heavy ra. Notice that when I do say the heavy ra, my lips are not circling at all. When I say ra, ra, see, my lips are not pushing out, they're not protruding, and they are not going into any kind of circular shape. My lips are not really involved when I'm pronouncing the fatha on the ra. When I'm saying the ra with maftuh or the ra with the fatha, I don't say ra, for example, ra, or I don't say ro and stick it out. It's a ra. The lips are flat and they are not protruding at all. Okay, because they're not involved with the letter ra. It's all about what's happening inside the mouth. Ra, rabbik. Another example is this one. Is this word birijlik? Here we have the ra with the kasra. So the kasra is the light one. So here we don't say biri, we say biri, birijlik, birijlik, birijlik. Okay, so this one's a lot more relaxed, requires less effort because you're not involving the back of the tongue anymore. Okay, rabbik and birijlik. Okay, and then finally we have the sakin ra. Now, in this particular example, the ra is heavy. There are times when the ra is sakin and it will be light, but we will not be covering that today. Today we're looking at the ra when it's heavy and sakina. So here we say wa makar. The ra is heavy. Wa makarna, wa makarna, wa makarna. The ra is one of those letters that when it is sakin, you stay on it just for a little bit. Not too long, so we don't say wa makarna. We don't stay on it too long and say wa makarna too long. Somewhere in between. It's known as a tawassut letter. This is when it has a sukoon on it. When it has a sukoon on it, not too long, not too short. Wa makarna, wa makarna. Okay, Jazakumullah khairan for your time. I have gone I've spent a little bit longer than I wanted to, but the ra did require quite a bit of discussion. I hope to see you again tomorrow, where we will be looking at the letter za. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته